So I'm gonna do a review of the Joker. Actually, I'm gonna give like a more thorough deep dive than what I've been seeing on YouTube. So I'm gonna go over everything. I think first and foremost, my first response to the movie was really positive. I really enjoyed it. I obviously there's gonna be a few things that you've been hearing a lot about the movie that praises it. Well, I'm just gonna quickly list them. Obviously, the movie has great cinematography. It looks beautiful. It has really great shots, some really great visuals going on. The music selection is pretty great, I think, for the most part. But there's one music selection that I really disagree with at a pivotal scene in the movie, actually, but I'll get to that later. But the underlying themes, I thought are really excellent, and Todd Phillips really, this is where he shined the most, is that he presents real world themes, real life politics in the comic book movie to open up conversation and discourse, which I think, is really excellent. And needless to say, the performance of Joaquin Phoenix, you've heard it before. Water is wet, fire is hot, and Joaquin Phoenix is amazing. So the politics of the Joker are very interesting. What I'm talking about, of course, is the underlying themes. First, I'm gonna start with the underlying theme of what the empowerment of guns can do to a person who's unstable or suffering from certain mental illness. So when the Joker starts to become evil, as we see in the movie, he's empowered by the gun, and the gun is, in fact, the beginning of his downfall. If you notice, it's the reason why he gets fired. So there's, of course, there's going to be some spoilers. Some spoiler alert here is, he gets fired because he drops the gun at a children's hospital from his clown job. And then from there on is where really, he starts taking a toll. And then he later uses the gun to protect himself, but in turn he starts to kill with it, to the point where it's no longer defending himself. So that's interesting as Todd Phillips presents that. He presents the critical argument about why certain benefits to lowering costs or for prescription drugs for people that suffer from mental illness. There's a scene where the Joker no longer gets funding for his prescription drugs, and he no longer gets funding for his psychiatric help, and because the government is cutting those support programs, and so because of that, he starts losing it even more. So it's like a combo: first the gun, then the cut of his benefits, and then we see the next tipping point is when he learns his mother lied to him and abused him as a child. It brings up his suppressed memory of being abused, and from there on we kind of see that he sees a letter, where she believes that Thomas Wayne the father of, as you know, Bruce Wayne, Batman, could possibly be his father. So the movie kind of leaves it ambiguous whether Thomas Wayne was the father or not, but it gives a little more evidence that most likely he wasn't. But it's not for sure because the mom left it open saying that she was forced to sign certain papers. We don't know if those papers meant that he was adopted or not. But then he sees that he was adopted as far as the paperwork says. And, that's where he totally loses it. He totally loses his mind in his tragic life. And I don't want to give too much away anymore, even though, if you haven't seen it, you shouldn't be listening to this, but whatever. In return, that's when he decides that his life is no longer a tragedy, but is a comedy. Because he has no choice. The only choice he has is in the way he sees his life. His perspective is the last will that he even has in life. And that's a very interesting take. I thought it was pretty sophisticated. It's kind of relates to this mythology, the Sisyphus, all about how you look at your life. It's all about your perspective, and that theme goes throughout, which I think is one of the strongest points of the movie. And then later he rejects his idol on television, who at one point he sees could be his father figure. He's so fanatical about, of course, Robert De Niro's character is a TV talk show personality. He eventually kills him. The most important part of that talk show scene, in my opinion, is that it really hits home, I think, what Todd Phillips is targeting the most is about subjective, if comedy is subjective or not. And they have a little exchange there about, whether comedy is subjective, what's funny, what's not, what could be joked about. I think another interesting part of the movie is the whole protest background, where there's a bunch of protesters, of many working class disenfranchised people who start wearing a bunch of clown masks, who are ultimately influenced by the Joker, by the fact that he killed 3 very rich Wall Street people who work for Wayne Enterprises, and they see this as inspiring, and there's a whole uprising of protests, kind of similar to something like Anonymous with the wearing the masks, so that not to give away their identity, they all wear clown masks. What's interesting about it is that, once again, this is a huge spoiler, is that, eventually he is chosen as their leader. There's a big climatic, victorious scene of them cheering on the Joker as their supreme leader. Anyway, moving on to some of the perspectives I wanted to talk about the movie that are taking place. There's some people that don't like it. Some people find it very polarizing. There's some very offended, I guess you could say. If you believe they're offended. Certain neoliberal agenda to really paint the movie as some kind of right-wing piece about understanding the incels, about it could promote violence, it could promote white incels to act violently. That's one of the arguments against the movie. But I'm gonna explain why I actually think that's silly. First of all, one of the main reasons is that this movie, if critics forget, is about the Joker. He is a villain. He's evil in many ways. I mean, if you even believe evil exists, the Joker would fall in that category. He's a bad guy. He does bad things. Warner Bros. Has already stated this is a movie about a villain, a bad guy. His actions aren't meant to be inspiring. They're not meant to provoke violence, of course. But no, you have a lot of hacky critics out there that want to make this movie controversial somehow. I don't know if it's to please, Disney, Marvel, or something. I don't know what they expect. Movies can be thought-provoking, apparently, to these very hacky critics. Then there's the right wing who believe that this movie is a big FU and speaks to them, and that it's actually more of like this this piece against political correctness, whatnot, or this piece that is basically about how we should understand certain people or be nice to certain people, whatever banal reasons they have to believe the movie speaks to them. I mean, just to answer to that, I mean, Todd Phillips is definitely not right wing. He's most likely a centrist, probably a left leaning centrist. Most likely he falls under a category of neoliberal Hollywood. He's part of the Hollywood elite. He's been part of it for a long time. He's been in the game for a while. He's friends with primarily liberal Hollywood figures. An example, Will Ferrell. Joaquin Phoenix, the star of the movie, is most definitely not a right winger. He is a liberal for animal rights, and he's known to have supported Democrats and Democratic campaigns. Even Todd Phillips's quote-unquote favorite person of all time, Robert Downey Jr. was in an anti-Trump commercial. So, and Zach Galifianakis, another friend of Todd Phillips, is also liberal. The movie has Robert De Niro, who is a devout Democrat and intensely anti-Trump. We all know how much De Niro hates Trump. So that brings to mind that, the movie also has a very parallel connection to, I believe, the rise of a monster like Trump, a type of sociopathic figure who has a mental illness. I find the analogy pretty brilliant in that the Joker's rise is very similar to Trump's rise, as in it's mainly a male working class white frustration into this broken system, a system that has failed many of the working class, but they don't know where to take out that frustration except that they want to see it turned upside down, which is what happened in the 2016 election. They rather see what they thought would be an outsider like Trump. As it turns out, he's not an outsider, he's part of the elite. But the most important connection from Trump to the Joker is that Trump is a sociopath just like the Joker, and quite possibly he suffers from certain delusions and mental illness just like the Joker. And the most brilliant part is that this political anarchist group picks the Joker to be their leader, although the Joker doesn't care about them. He's only really doing it for himself. And that is the closest connection I see to Trump, because Trump, as a sociopath, is really just doing everything for himself, to enrich himself for his own reasons. And with that being said, there's not much more I could say about Todd Phillips. Obviously, not being any Republican of any sort, not even a right winger either. At best, he's probably a centrist or center left. And that moves on to the next category. And that next category is what I believe is that in most of these underlying themes that are connected with our real issues in politics, I think at best Todd Phillips is probably playing mostly a moral middle card. And that's usually what the center left likes to do a lot. I think he's trying to play the two sides of things in a lot of the movie. For one example, as far as the guns are involved in the movie, he kind of leaves it open to discussion in both ways, because he shows that yes, the guns in the hand of a mentally ill person can be very hazardous, and therefore calling for gun control or universal background checks. But then again, in the film, we see that he's given the gun through no background check. He's just given the gun from a friend, which means he acquires the gun illegally under the table, regardless of the law, regardless if he's supposed to have the gun or not. So that's kind of leaves it open for discussion that, regardless, these people could get guns anyway. Also, the theme where Joker says that he's not political, but then ironically he becomes a political leader. The Joker also makes politically incorrect jokes, but they are not funny, which leads to what I think is the clearest message from somebody like Todd Phillips that I'm pretty certain of, is that he's coming out with a message coming from a background of comedy. What would a comedic director do in making a serious movie? I think he wanted to show the difference between a bad comedy and a good comedy, regardless of its political incorrectness. What I mean is good jokes, bad jokes. So he puts in perspective that Robert De Niro is funny. He makes good jokes that are politically incorrect. He makes fun of the Joker. He makes fun of people, but they're funny. But the Joker is not funny, and he makes politically incorrect jokes. And that leads to, obviously, one of the most predictable things about people obsessed with making money off of comedy, like comedians and directors of this sort, is that they don't want it to be taken away by political correctness. So he's making this comparison to show that there's a difference between funny political incorrectness and not funny political incorrectness, to kind of display his example. I believe he wanted to make was that there is certain jokes about a small people in the movie. There's a small person in the film, and please, I apologize if that's the incorrect term, but in this part there was certain people who found it a little bit funny, and he's kind of has, I think Todd Phillips present this as, I got you moment, that's funny, but it's very insensitive and politically correct. So I think he's really trying to drive this home. The part I have the most disagreement with is his choice to pick Gary Glitter's song in for one of the pivotal climatic scenes of the movie, which, I think it's a pretty decent song, but the problem is that to acquire that song in a movie, you have to pay royalties, of course, and that money is going to Gary Glitter, who happens to be a known past pedophile. So I don't understand. At first, I thought I kind of gave it a pass because I think it was a deliberate choice to try to trigger people, but not just to trigger people, but to go with the theme that this is a villain, therefore he dances to a villain's music. And I thought it was pretty clever in that way. But at the end of the day, you could have picked many other songs that worked really better. The song didn't even work good for the scene, in my opinion. There could have been way better songs to pick than that one. And it would have been nice not to give a lot of royalty money to a guy convicted of being a pedophile. Just a thought. So anyway, that was the big disagreement. All that being said, at the end of the day, the triumph of the film is that actually, quote-unquote, woke culture actually prevailed in getting Todd Phillips to make a far better movie like this. Instead of movies like Road Trip and a very whatever's franchise like The Hangover with some silly fart jokes or whatnot, he decided to make more serious movies. I mean, he made a movie about the corruption of arms dealing, and now he made this movie, which is really thought-provoking and very artful, in my opinion. And he has progressed as a filmmaker and has reached probably the pinnacle of his success, and his pinnacle of himself as an artistic director, making a movie, because woke culture, or the politically correct culture, has forced them to actually make a thought-provoking movie. I thought the movie was excellent. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks.